He stood in front of 200 students at Cambridge. Black. 17. A genius, and the professor looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You should drop the class." No one spoke. No one objected. The room froze. Days later, that same professor accused him of cheating because the paper he turned in was too brilliant to be real. But what happened next, no one saw coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The train from London to Cambridge rolled through a crisp morning fog, the English countryside stretching out in soft waves beneath a pale sky. Marcellus Grant, slouched against the window, clutched a worn leather backpack on his lap. He had memorized every fact about the university: its founding in 1209, its roster of Nobel laureates, its reputation for cold, blinding brilliance. But no amount of preparation could steel him for what he was about to walk into. Only 17 and already enrolled in an advanced theoretical mathematics course. Marcellus was the youngest and one of the few black students ever admitted through the Prestwich Global Scholars Program. Hailing from West Baltimore, a neighborhood more familiar with boarded-up row homes and police helicopters than ivy-covered libraries, Marcellus wasn't just attending Cambridge. He was defying gravity. He stepped into the grand archway of Pembroke College, with a heart drumming fast against his ribs. The air smelled of ancient stone and privilege. His sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished floor of the lecture hall as he entered. 60 heads turned. The chatter dulled. Marcellus knew this kind of silence. It wasn't curiosity. It was an audit, a cross-examination. Professor Charles Whitford, silver-haired and famously unforgiving, stood at the podium, flipping through papers. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, ruthless, and proudly old school. He noticed Marcellus enter late, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting movement. The professor's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You're in the wrong room, young man. This is mathematical logic and foundations. Math 501. Undergraduates don't take this course." Marcellus froze. A few students chuckled behind their MacBooks. A girl with a pastel scarf leaned over to whisper something, muffled giggles rippling out. Marcellus cleared his throat, clutching his enrollment form tighter.
"I'm enrolled, sir. Prestwich Scholar. Grant, Marcellus."
A pause. Professor Whitford adjusted his glasses. His voice came sharper this time. "Oh, the American." He didn't need to say the rest. The emphasis on the made it clear. The black boy. He stared for a beat too long before waving a dismissive hand. "You should drop the class. Save yourself the embarrassment." The class went dead silent. Even the typing stopped. No one intervened.
No one asked a question.
No one defended him. Marcellus didn't speak. He just sat down slowly, in the back row, every inch of his skin burning with humiliation. He wasn't new to being underestimated, but this was different. This was surgical, intentional. Cambridge wasn't just challenging his intelligence. It was denying his right to belong. The lecture started, but Marcellus didn't hear most of it. The formulas danced on the projector screen, blurred behind the rage in his chest. He wrote anyway, took notes anyway. The words dropped. The class looped in his mind like a dare. Later that night, in the dim quiet of his single dorm room, he replayed the scene 100 times. Every sneer, every unspoken judgment. He opened his laptop, stared at the blinking cursor, and started writing his first assignment, a 5-page theoretical breakdown of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. But he didn't just write it. He dissected it, reconstructed it in a way no one had done before, connecting abstract theory to quantum computing, embedding a logic recursion that resolved a centuries-old paradox. Marcellus didn't care if they thought he belonged. He would force them to see it. He barely slept, turned it in 2 days early. By the time the paper reached Whitford's hands, Marcellus had moved on to his next project. But he never stopped thinking about that moment. That cold dismissal. That public humiliation. Whitford read the paper at his desk late one evening, scowling as the paragraphs unfolded in shocking clarity. He read it again, then again. His scowl slowly cracked into a frown. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the last page. He didn't just recognize brilliance. He recognized threat. The next morning, a faculty-wide email is sent out under the subject line, "Urgent review required. Assignment under investigation." The faculty-wide email spread through Cambridge like a quiet, poisonous breeze. Students whispered about it at breakfast tables, in libraries, in the long stone corridors, echoing with centuries of entitlement. Marcellus Grant didn't see the email until he walked into the mathematics building and noticed the stairs, longer, colder, more pointed than before. He had gotten used to being watched, but this felt different. This felt like a verdict had already been written. He opened the email on his phone. Urgent review required. Assignment under investigation. That was all it said. No explanation. No courtesy. No context. Just a digital accusation hanging in the air like a trap. When he reached the seminar room, Professor Whitford stood at the front, rigid and pale, as if preparing for a storm he had helped create. The other professors sat in a half circle, their folders thick with printed pages. When Marcellus entered, Whitford's voice didn't rise, but the quiet sting was unmistakable. "Mr. Grant," he said, looking at him over the rim of his glasses, "we'll speak after the session." Students pretended not to stare, but they weren't subtle. Their eyes flicked from their notebooks to him, to each other, then back to him, as if waiting for drama to unfold. Marcellus sat, spine stiff, heart slowing from anger into something colder. He tried to focus on the lecture, but the words blurred. Every few seconds he felt another eye on him. Every whisper drew blood. He remembered the first day, the way Whitford's voice had sliced through the room, telling him to drop the class. Now the accusation felt like a natural extension of that moment, as though this was what Cambridge expected from someone like him. After class, Whitford closed the door and gestured to a chair. "Sit." Marcellus sat, placing his backpack at his feet. Whitford's fingers tapped the table, controlled yet laced with agitation. "I'll be direct," the professor said. "Your submission shows unusual sophistication. Unusual for any student, frankly." Marcellus met his gaze. "It's my work." Whitford clasped his hands. "You'll forgive my skepticism." There it was, the quiet, polished racism, the kind disguised beneath academic language. Don't yell it. Intellectualize it. Don't accuse him outright. Imply inferiority. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" Marcellus asked, keeping his voice even. "That level of integration between Gödel's theorem and quantum frameworks isn't common knowledge," Whitford replied, "especially not for someone without a previous research portfolio." Marcellus almost laughed at the word someone, the way it floated like a placeholder for something harsher. "I studied," he said simply. Whitford leaned back. "We are launching a routine investigation. Standard procedure." But nothing about it was standard. Marcellus had seen enough to understand what the phrase meant in academic spaces. Routine was a word institutions used when they didn't want to say "we don't trust the black kid." He walked out, jaw tight, pulse pressing behind his eyes. The hallway felt narrower, the walls older, the portraits of white scholars lining the walls, suddenly more judgmental. Cambridge's traditions weren't built for boys like him. They were built to keep boys like him out. At lunch in the cafeteria, he felt the isolation sharpen. A group of students, all wearing the polished, expensive confidence of upper-class backgrounds, sat nearby. A blond boy with a fitted blazer looked up when Marcellus passed and gave a tight, mocking smile. "Heard the scandal?" he murmured to his friend, loud enough for Marcellus to hear. "Pressed which money wasted." His friend smirked. "What did you expect? They hand out scholarships for diversity points." The girl beside them giggled softly, covering her mouth. "He probably copied from some American grad student." Marcellus kept walking. If he stopped, if he reacted, he would become the angry stereotype they wanted him to be. Later, the dean's assistant emailed him with instructions to report to the academic integrity office. The message was sterile, mathematical in its lack of humanity. "Please be prepared to demonstrate your original thought process." He sat through hours of questioning. The committee members, dressed in academic robes like they were characters in a medieval play, asked him to explain every paragraph of his paper. They questioned his methodology, his choice of references, his phrasing. One of them, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a colder voice, said, "Did you have assistance?" "Only from books and lectures," Marcellus answered. She leaned forward. "Not the internet? Friends? Ghostwriters?" The word ghostwriters stung. It carried an insidious implication. People like him didn't create. They borrowed. When he left the room, he felt hollow. Like they had carved pieces out of him and examined them under a microscope, searching for flaws they assumed must exist. Days passed, and every achievement he worked for turned into suspicion. His homework was returned with comments like, "Style inconsistent," "Explain discrepancy." His emails received delayed or curt replies. One afternoon, After a particularly advanced comment he made during a seminar, a classmate whispered just loud enough, "Smart move, trying to overcompensate." In the library, two students sitting across from him lowered their voices just enough to pretend they weren't talking about him. "Look, it's not racism," one insisted. "It's just improbable that he wrote that paper." "Exactly," the other replied. "Probability matters in mathematics." He forced himself to ignore them. Focus. Right. Prove them wrong. But proving them wrong didn't change the reality. They didn't want him to be right. One evening, while reviewing research notes, Marcellus overheard his roommate, Cameron, talking on the phone. Cameron didn't know Marcellus had returned early. "Yeah, the American kid," Cameron muttered. "Honestly, people say he's some kind of genius. But I don't know. Feels off." Whitford said the essay was too good to be real. Marcellus froze in the doorway. Cameron turned around, startled, face flushing with guilt. "Marcellus. Hey, I didn't know you were back." "So that's what you think too?" Marcellus asked, voice calm, dangerously calm. Cameron swallowed. "Look, man, I didn't say you cheated. People are talking. It's Cambridge. Standards are high. You get it." Marcellus nodded once. "Yeah, I get it." That night, sleep didn't come. His mind twisted around the same question. What more do they want from me? A confession I don't have? A failure to make them comfortable? He felt like a trespasser in every corridor, an intruder in every room, a mistake in every lecture. And yet, beneath that pain, something else grew, a slow burning resolve, sharper than anger, deeper than pride. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday morning. He received a formal notice. Failure to demonstrate authenticity may result in academic suspension. Suspension. For writing something brilliant. He went to Whitford's office, refusing to let the accusation rot in silence. Whitford looked up, irritated. "Mr. Grant, you should have emailed for an appointment." "We need to talk," Marcellus said. Whitford sighed. "Fine. Speak." "You know I wrote that paper." Whitford didn't look away. "I know you submitted it." "You think I'm lying?" "I think," Whitford said slowly, "that genius rarely comes in isolation. And brilliance from unfamiliar sources must be verified thoroughly." "Unfamiliar sources," Marcellus repeated softly. "You mean me?" Whitford's mouth tightened. "Don't twist my words." "That's impossible," Marcellus replied. "They're already twisted." For a moment, something flickered in Whitford's eyes, annoyance mixed with something darker, an insecurity disguised as authority. It lasted only a second, but Marcellus saw it. Whitford wasn't afraid of plagiarism. He was afraid of being outshined by someone he had already labeled as inferior. Marcellus walked out, chest tight, vision blurring for a moment, as he stepped into the hallway where sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. He felt trapped between centuries-old expectations and the fragile space he was fighting to carve out. He needed proof, real proof, to clear his name. Something undeniable. That answer came unexpectedly. A classmate named Avery, quiet and usually detached, approached him near the library steps. "Marcellus," he whispered, glancing around nervously, "I think you should hear something." "Hear what?" Avery pulled out his phone, palms shaking. "Just listen." He pressed play. Whitford's voice poured out of the speakers, cold and unmistakable. "He's too sharp. If we let him through unchallenged, it sets a precedent. Students like him start thinking they belong in these rooms." Marcellus felt the world narrow to a single point. Whitford continued, voice lower now, conspiratorial. "We need to contain this. Push him. Corner him. If he breaks, it validates the system." Avery stopped the recording. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know they were planning something like this." Marcellus's pulse roared in his ears. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, explosive. But the twist came a second later. Avery bit his lip and said quietly, "There's more, and it's worse." The second half of the secret recording doesn't just expose a plot, it names someone Marcellus never expected to betray him. Avery's hand trembled slightly as he handed over a flash drive. Marcellus stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into his jacket pocket. The air between them was thick with tension, unspoken fear lacing every breath. "There's more," Avery repeated, his voice low. "Just be careful." Marcellus didn't ask how Avery got the recording. Not yet. The trust it took for him to share it, after remaining silent for weeks, was enough to signal how deeply the corruption ran. The student body wasn't just indifferent. Many were terrified, silent accomplices by design. That night, in the safety of his dorm, Marcellus plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The audio file loaded slowly, the progress bar dragging, as if resisting the weight of what it contained. The first voice was Whitford's, already damning, already cold. "If we allow that kind of performance to pass without scrutiny," Whitford said, his accent clipped and clinical, "we send a message that anyone, from anywhere, with the right narrative, can dismantle the system." Another voice chimed in, male, sharp, familiar. "We built this place to foster tradition, Charles, not to surrender it to imported brilliance, particularly brilliance that isn't properly grounded in legacy." The code was transparent. Imported brilliance, legacy, all polite substitutes for black and white. A woman's voice joined in, more cautious but no less complicit. "He's not just outperforming the cohort, he's doing it publicly. If this goes viral, if he goes viral, our admissions pipeline will fracture." How do you explain to donors that their sons were passed over for a kid from West Baltimore? Laughter followed. Bitter, quiet laughter, not from amusement, but strategy. They weren't afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of being exposed. Then came the twist. Grant's mentor, the male voice said, has been leaking his potential to other departments. He'll get picked up by Stanford or MIT if we don't act. We can't let that happen. A folder rustled. Papers moved. "We keep the plagiarism investigation open," said Whitford. "Delay his progress. Isolate him socially. If he transfers, we wash our hands clean. If he snaps, that's on him." The recording cut off abruptly. A few seconds of static hummed before silence took over. Marcellus sat frozen, his hands slowly curling into fists. It wasn't just Whitford. It was an entire circle. And worse, his mentor was part of it. He had trusted Dr. Landon Pierce, a mid-level advisor in the mathematics department, who initially welcomed him to campus with a handshake and polished charm. Landon had once said, "You remind me of what academia should be, pure thought, not pedigree." Now that compliment curdled in memory. That night, Marcellus made a choice. He uploaded the full audio anonymously onto a student server used to share lecture notes. No caption, no context, just one file titled, Cambridge Unfiltered. It took less than 3 hours to erupt. By sunrise, the recording had gone viral across WhatsApp groups, Reddit threads, and encrypted Twitter circles. Students across the globe, especially students of color, began reposting it under hashtags like Cambridge Cover-Up and Marcellus was right. Protests formed almost instantly on digital fronts. The university's first response was predictable. Silence. Then came a blanket statement that reeked of corporate sanitization. Cambridge remains committed to diversity, integrity, and intellectual honesty. We are investigating the unauthorized release of sensitive faculty materials. Sensitive materials. Not hate. Not conspiracy. Not systemic abuse. Just unauthorized. And suddenly, the institution pivoted. Instead of addressing the content of the audio, they hunted its leaker. Within days, Marcellus was summoned, not by the math department, not even by academic leadership, but by the Office of Digital Ethics. The tone was polite. The meaning was not. He sat across from a new face, Ms. Granger, Director of IT Compliance. Middle-aged, crisp blouse and a smile that never touched her eyes. "We're aware," she said, fingers laced on the table, "that the file originated from your dorm network." Marcellus didn't flinch. "And you're investigating the racism." Granger blinked once. Slowly. "We're investigating the breach of internal systems. Data ethics, Mr. Grant." "The ethics," he said carefully, "of exposing institutional racism." She smiled again. "Of distributing private faculty discussions without consent." That was when it became clear. Cambridge wasn't going to protect him. They were going to contain him. That afternoon, the tone around campus changed. Professors who once nodded at him in hallways now looked away. Peers who quietly admired him now avoided eye contact. The same ones who had whispered doubts now had ammunition. He was a troublemaker, a rebel, a leaker. Even the campus newspaper ran a headline that spun the story. Prestwich scholar under fire for faculty breach.
No mention of the racism, no quotes from the leaked audio, just speculation and selective outrage.
The university closed ranks in ways only elite institutions knew how to do. Silently, politely, efficiently. Office doors were shut. Meetings were canceled. Lecture seating plans were reshuffled. And worst of all, Marcellus received a chilling email. As part of our ongoing inquiry, you are restricted from attending lectures in person until further notice. This is for your safety and the safety of the academic environment. It sounded like protection. It was punishment. They were making him a ghost in the very school he had earned his way into. Invisible. Unwelcome. His inbox exploded with mixed messages. Anonymous threats. Racial slurs. Demands to go back where you came from. But there were also messages from other students. Strangers from Tokyo, Lagos, Atlanta, saying, "We believe you. We heard you. Don't stop." Marcellus stared at his screen, overwhelmed by the weight of being both hated and hailed. He was too young to carry this, but too proud to put it down. He needed direction. He needed help. And help came in the strangest form. Late one night, his email pinged. Subject: "You're not the first, but you could be the last." The body of the email contained only a phone number and a name. Ezra Langston. At first it meant nothing, but a quick search of the university archives revealed a ghost. Ezra Langston had been a Prestwich scholar in 1982. Black. Brilliant. Disappeared mid-semester. No records of graduation. No thesis submitted. No disciplinary action filed. Just vanished. Until now. Heart pounding. Marcellus dialed the number. It rang once. Then twice. Then, a raspy voice answered. Soft but firm. "You finally found me." "Ezra?" A pause. "I was waiting for someone like you," the voice said. "They tried to bury me in silence. They won't bury you the same way. But if you want to survive this, you'll need to finish what I started." Marcellus leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breath. "What did you start?" A longer pause this time. Then Ezra said, "A weapon. The kind they can't ignore. But you'll have to go back deeper than your course. Back into what they erased." Marcellus swallowed hard. The stakes had changed. This wasn't about a paper anymore. This wasn't about an assignment, or even one student's reputation. This was about the structure, the rot in the walls, the centuries-old machinery that crushed dissent beneath robes and ceremony. And someone had left a blueprint. Ezra offers Marcellus access to a long-buried system exploit inside Cambridge's academic framework. A ghost code built decades ago that could either rewrite his future or destroy them both. The line crackled as Ezra Langston exhaled softly. "They thought deleting me would delete the evidence," he said, voice worn but sharp. "But I buried it deeper than they expected. Beneath their precious framework, behind their firewall." Marcellus sat motionless, eyes glued to the flickering cursor on his laptop. The line between myth and reality was dissolving fast. Ezra Langston, the erased prodigy, wasn't just real. He had been preparing for this. "I need you to listen carefully," Ezra said. "Because once you open this, you can't pretend you didn't. The code I left inside the Cambridge database was meant to expose their evaluation system, the bias embedded in how they score, admit, and rank. But it's more than exposure. It's a mirror they can't break." Marcellus leaned forward. "Where is it?" "In the old mathematics department server archives," Ezra replied. "Under a course no longer listed. Quantitative Epistemics 319. The system still thinks it exists. Hidden in plain sight." Marcellus felt his pulse climb. This wasn't just about his defense anymore. This was about proving how the institution itself operated. How brilliance from black students was filtered through suspicion. How legacy students were elevated through invisible privilege. If Ezra's algorithm still functioned, it could pull metadata from decades of academic records, patterns, disparities, proof, and now it was in his hands. At 2:13 a.m., Marcellus slipped into the dimly lit computer lab, careful to avoid the cameras. He typed slowly, each keystroke echoing in the room like a dare. He navigated past the Cambridge front-facing interface, diving beneath digital walls that hadn't been touched in years. There it was. Archives Courses QE 319, Langston Branch. The folder blinked once, then opened. Inside, hundreds of lines of code pulsed across the screen, annotated with minimalist comments. Marcellus recognized the structure. Ezra had written it in outdated languages, obscured by abstraction, but it was clean, elegant, alive. The deeper he dove, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a project. This was a diagnostic tool designed to track how professors marked students based on race, name, and background. An artificial intelligence system trained to detect unconscious and conscious bias through pattern recognition. Ezra had created it nearly 40 years ago, and Cambridge had buried it. Hours passed. like minutes. Marcellus worked in a trance, decrypting, updating, adapting. He merged the algorithm with his own final year research, a machine learning model trained to optimize education pathways based on cognition styles. Together, the two systems became a weapon of truth. It didn't just prove the existence of discrimination, it visualized it. He saw graphs emerge, black students clustered in the lower quartile for participation grades, despite identical performance. International students penalized disproportionately. In subjective scoring, legacy students overwhelmingly funneled into top project groups. It was devastating. It was undeniable.
And it was about to be presented.
The department's final symposium was days away, an open-floor academic forum where top students presented their capstone projects. If Marcellus could get on the roster, he could reveal everything, not just to Cambridge, but to the world. The event was live-streamed, archived, watched. But the danger wasn't theoretical. Ezra's final warning echoed in his ears. If you do this, they'll come for you harder than they came for me. Cambridge doesn't lose gracefully. Still, Marcellus submitted his project under the title Systemic Entropy, Quantifying Academic Bias Through Predictive Analysis. The title was vague enough to pass initial screening, but the abstract filled with technical jargon and non-threatening language cloaked the bomb inside. To his surprise, the project was approved. But approval came with new eyes. The department head, Dr. Beaumont, a man who had previously ignored Marcellus's existence, suddenly requested a meeting. In his office, Beaumont smiled too easily. "This is quite ambitious," he said, flipping through the printed abstract. "It's based on recorded data," Marcellus replied, careful with his tone. "Cambridge doesn't usually allow independent data mining," Beaumont said, almost gently. "I used only institutional archives. Nothing confidential." Beaumont's smile faltered for half a second. "Even so, you understand the potential controversy." Marcellus met his eyes. "Only if the data tells a controversial story." Beaumont didn't respond. Instead, he tapped his fingers once and dismissed him. The silence said everything. The next 3 days were surreal. Rumors spread that Marcellus's project was being reviewed for compliance. Faculty members stopped acknowledging him in corridors. A few students warned him that the administration was combing through his academic file, looking for irregularities. Still, no official block came. The clock ticked down toward the symposium. The night before the presentation, Marcellus worked late in his dorm room. Final lines of code, backups encrypted, USB drives labeled and hidden in 3 separate locations. If they tried to erase the truth, he'd be ready. At 3:07 a.m., he finally leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his bones. He shut his laptop, turned toward his bed. That's when he heard it, a soft metallic click, the door lock. He froze. Then slowly, the door creaked open. A shadow moved inside. Slow, careful, gloved hands rifling through his drawers. Then his desk. A light flicked on for half a second. Enough to catch the edge of his backpack. Marcellus didn't move. He reached silently for his phone. But the shadow was fast. Too fast. The figure snatched the laptop from the desk, yanked cords, and darted out the door before Marcellus could even find his voice. By the time he reached the hallway, it was empty. Gone. His laptop, his files, his project. The next morning, campus security filed a report, but without cameras on that side of the dorm, there were no identifiable suspects. When Marcellus asked for a deeper investigation, the officer on duty said flatly, "Best to let this go. You've stirred enough waves." He stood outside the lecture hall where the symposium was already beginning, hands empty, fury thick in his throat. Speakers walked in one by one with their polished presentations. His name was still on the schedule, but he had nothing to present. Until a voice behind him said, "I thought you'd need a backup." Marcellus turned. "It very." He held out a USB drive. "You left it in the library printer last night." Marcellus stared at it. "You sure it's mine?" Avery smirked. "It's labeled in case they panic." Marcellus took it with shaking hands. His legs carried him forward like they didn't belong to him. The doors opened. The lights were too bright. The podium too still. But when he plugged in the drive and his presentation appeared on the screen, everything else disappeared. He cleared his throat. "Good morning. My name is Marcellus Grant. My presentation today is about silence, institutional silence, patterned silence, algorithmic silence. The audience leaned in. The project you're about to see uses data Cambridge itself generated to show how success isn't distributed by brilliance, but by bloodlines. How evaluations, group assignments, and professor feedback tilt against marginalized students year after year. Invisibly, he clicked. A graph appeared, then another, then a heat map. Gasps followed, whispers, stunned silence, and then the video glitched. The screen stuttered and crashed. Marcellus looked down. System error, content blocked by administrative firewall. As the audience murmurs in confusion, an emergency email pings every faculty device. Cambridge's IT department has force-disabled his access across the university's network. Marcellus stares at the screen. As a single line appears, "You are no longer authorized." The screen froze with cruel finality. "You are no longer authorized." The message pulsed across the podium in stark white against a black background, as if it had been waiting for him. Marcellus stood motionless. The audience, once buzzing with curiosity, fell into murmurs of confusion and awkward glances. The symposium moderator stepped toward the mic, visibly flustered, stammering something about technical interruptions. But Marcellus didn't move. His project, his voice, his proof, it had all been silenced in one administrative keystroke. They hadn't just shut down his presentation. They'd tried to delete him. Later that night, he returned to his dorm. The hallway felt colder, the silence too intentional. When he opened the door, a single glance told him the truth. His room had been ransacked. Not messily, surgically. His notebooks were gone. His secondary laptop vanished. His drawers had been opened, rifled through, and left half shut. His USB backups cleared. The only thing left was a white envelope on his desk. No name, just a single typed message. "Consider this your last warning." He stared at it, chest tight, heart slamming against his ribs. This wasn't a game anymore. It was war. He reported the break-in, again, but the response from campus security was dismissive at best. "Maybe you misplaced them." The officer shrugged, not even bothering to look up from his tablet. Stress makes students do forgetful things. The insinuation rang louder than the words. "You don't belong here. We don't believe you." That same bureaucratic tone, the same coldness he knew from Baltimore, wrapped in a Cambridge accent. Back in his room, stripped of his tools, Marcellus sat on the floor, surrounded by the remains of his work. But defeat didn't come. Instead, something more dangerous did. Clarity. From the lining of his jacket, he pulled out a small flash drive. His final emergency backup. The stripped-down code. It wasn't the full version, but it was enough to start again. He couldn't trust his dorm. He couldn't trust the labs. So he became a ghost on campus. He coded at night, shifting between abandoned library basements, unused art department labs, and forgotten corners of the biology building. He kept the lights dim, the volume low, and his footsteps silent. Every tap of the keyboard felt like an act of rebellion. And then the threats started. At first, anonymous emails. "You're wasting your time. You're not good enough to beat this. You don't understand how things work here." Then they got personal. A blurry photo of his mother's house. A text message that read, "Still got family back in Baltimore. Huh?" And one that made his blood run cold. "Nice talk with Landon Pierce." His mentor, his trusted advisor, the man who welcomed him to Cambridge, had been feeding them information. The betrayal hit harder than the threat. Every kind word, every smile had been part of the surveillance. Still, he coded, night after night, with trembling fingers and eyes red from exhaustion. He rebuilt the algorithm. It wasn't just about data anymore. He redesigned it to live online, to clone itself, to send copies the moment someone tried to destroy it. It evolved from a tool into a fortress. Every test he ran confirmed what he already knew. Cambridge's system wasn't broken. It was built this way, to reward legacy, to punish brilliance that didn't look like theirs. But the more he built, the more resistance he faced. In the basement of the biology lab, while working late, he noticed strange activity in his system. His IP was being pinged repeatedly. Someone was tracking his location through the network. His files had been accessed remotely. Someone inside the university's IT infrastructure was watching. He pulled the battery from the device, slammed the lid shut, and sat in darkness. For the first time, he truly felt hunted. Yet somehow, within the paranoia, he found a new fire. With each threat, each obstacle, his resolve sharpened. He returned the next night to a different lab. He encrypted every file, created decoys, installed dead switches that would destroy the project if tampered with. The code wasn't just alive now, it was untouchable. And finally, he had something more than theory. He had a presentation that showed racial bias in scoring, admissions, evaluations, all backed by real-time data, all visualized, impossible to dispute. And then it happened. While finishing the final build, he heard something outside the lab. A soft movement. Not wind. Not footsteps. Deliberate. He paused. Listened. Then crawled toward the window and peeked outside. Someone stood by the emergency door. No security cameras pointed that way. No light except for the emergency bulb overhead. The figure didn't move, just stood still, like he was waiting. Marcellus narrowed his eyes, and his breath caught. It was Dean Holloway, the Vice-Chancellor's personal advisor, wearing a Cambridge-issued trench coat, holding a key card. The same man who smiled at him on orientation day and said, "Your scholarship means the world to us." Now he was outside a hidden lab at 1:42 a.m., lurking, quiet, dangerous. Marcellus didn't breathe. He carefully pulled the USB drive from the computer and tucked it inside his sock. The moment the figure turned away, he slipped out the side door, heart pounding. He didn't go back to his dorm. He didn't call Ezra. He vanished into the old library stacks, into a forgotten wing sealed off for renovation. There, between dusty shelves and collapsed beams, he powered up a new machine and reloaded the project. It took hours, but when the final line of code ran green, he knew it was ready. This was no longer about Cambridge. This was about every institution that used prestige to mask oppression, every system that smiled while it cut you down. And then his screen flickered. A pop-up blinked. Authorization revoked. Access denied. His university login had just been terminated while he was still working. A second later, a security bulletin echoed through every device on campus. Marcellus Grant, access suspended due to academic breach. Report immediately to campus authority. He isn't just under threat now. He's officially marked. A hunted name in a system built to erase students like him before they ever had a voice. The air inside the high chamber smelled of polished wood, old books, and older decisions. The room had hosted centuries of debates, but today's gathering wasn't on the public schedule. The doors were locked, curtains drawn. No students allowed, only faculty, only power. The agenda. Discussion of academic conduct. Grant, Marcellus, Prestwich Scholar. At the head of the room sat Professor Gerald Matheson, head of the Faculty Ethics Council, flanked by 7 other tenured professors, all white, all male, except one. Their expressions were not curious. They were calculated. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, like judges convening for a quiet trial without a defendant. Matheson cleared his throat. "Colleagues, we are not here to debate personal feelings. We are here to determine if Mr. Grant's actions constitute grounds for suspension or expulsion." A shuffle of papers, a tightening of jaws. Professor Aldridge leaned forward, voice laced with old-world patience. "Let's not pretend this is about a single student's project. This is about containment. The boy has made the university look vulnerable. He has revealed statistical truths," countered Dr. Nguyen, his tone cautious but firm. "Data Cambridge itself generated. If anything, that should prompt introspection." Aldridge waved him off. "It's not the content, it's the delivery, the tone." He didn't seek dialogue. He sought disruption. Viral disruption. Professor Lynette Kane, quiet until now, finally spoke. He named names. A few heads nodded. "That wasn't scholarship," Aldridge said. "That was spectacle." Someone cleared their throat from the back row. Dr. Eliza Moore. She was young, maybe too young to be sitting in that room, her adjunct title barely earned after years of underpaid postdoc work. Her eyes were tired, but her voice didn't tremble. "With respect," she said, "what you're calling spectacle is survival. This isn't about policy, it's about prejudice." All eyes turned to her. Kane scoffed lightly. "Eliza, please." "No," Eliza said, voice steady. "You're trying to silence a student because he exposed you." The math department never questioned his intellect until he showed them what they didn't want to see. Matheson leaned forward. He distributed confidential materials. He accessed unauthorized servers. He violated our cybersecurity protocols. Eliza didn't blink. "Because you deleted his access. You broke trust first." Aldridge's voice sharpened. "This is a faculty meeting, not a courtroom." "Exactly," she said. And you're trying to sentence him without him ever stepping inside. Silent. No one defended her. No one joined her. The vote proceeded. 7 hands raised in favor of formal academic sanctions. 1 hand, Eliza's, stood alone in opposition. By the time Marcellus heard what happened, the decision had already been made. A sealed envelope waited under his door. Inside, 2 sentences printed on official university letterhead. Final warning. Further violation of institutional protocol will result in permanent removal from the Prestwich Scholars Program. There was no explanation of what violation they referred to. No appeal process listed. No office hours to dispute it. Just a warning dressed as closure. Marcellus stared at the letter for a long time, seated in the dim corner of the library's abandoned east wing. The same place he'd been hiding since his login had been revoked. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury. They were playing a slow game of erasure. If they couldn't prove he lied, they'd isolate him, starve him of resources, push him towards self-destruction, and then blame him for the fall. That evening he tried to log into the university database one last time. The result was the same. Access denied. But this time something new appeared at the bottom of the screen. If you are experiencing technical issues, contact Dr. Eliza Moore. He stared at the name for a long moment. It was the first official acknowledgement that someone still stood beside him. He found her 2 days later in the faculty garden. Her blazer wrinkled, her expression exhausted. She didn't greet him, just handed him a folded paper. They suspended me for breaching faculty confidentiality, she said softly. Said I brought personal bias into a professional space. Marcellus swallowed the guilt rising in his throat. I didn't mean for you. I know, she cut in. But they've been waiting to sideline me since I started. I was already an exception. You gave them the excuse. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the chirp of birds and the rustle of hedges. Then she added, you have one last move, 1 presentation slot left. The independent research showcase in 4 days. Off campus. Public. They can't block it because it's privately funded. His eyes lifted. How do I get in? I already submitted your name, she said, finally smiling. It's all I could do before they locked my credentials. A beat passed. Then Marcellus whispered, why help me? She exhaled, looking up at the gray Cambridge sky. Because when I was your age, I had a professor who said I didn't belong in theoretical mathematics, that I lacked the natural abstraction faculties for it. I didn't fight back. He nodded, quietly absorbing the cost of her stand. She had everything to lose, and she lost it anyway. As he walked away, back toward the shadows of the forgotten corridors that had become his refuge, he thought about how universities love to romanticize revolutionaries, but only the dead ones, the ones they couldn't be embarrassed by. He wasn't dead, he was very much alive, and he was now running out of time. As Marcellus prepares for the off-campus presentation, he receives an anonymous message with only a location pin, and the words, they're planning to discredit you before you speak. Meet me if you want to stop them. The anonymous message sat on Marcellus's phone like a ticking clock. They're planning to discredit you before you speak. Meet me if you want to stop them. A single pin dropped on a digital map, just outside Cambridge's formal campus boundary, deep in the shadows of an old church-turned-storage wing, now off-limits and forgotten. Every instinct told him it could be a trap, but every beat of his intuition said it was the thread he couldn't ignore. It was Ezra. He waited near the iron gate, surrounded by wild ivy and forgotten bricks. The building looked abandoned, but as Marcellus stepped inside, a small generator hummed faintly beneath the stone floor. Down a narrow stairwell, and behind a wooden door marked archives, Ezra stood waiting, eyes as sharp as the first time they spoke. I figured you'd come, Ezra said quietly, his hands tucked in a fraying coat. Marcellus scanned the room, boxes stacked floor to ceiling, aged paper labels peeling from manila folders, dust motes floating in thin light that streamed through a shattered stained glass window. What is this place? Marcellus asked. Ezra walked deeper into the stacks. What's left of the real Cambridge, the part they don't polish for brochures. He handed Marcellus a faded folder. Inside, an old ID photo. Black and white. A young black man wearing a Cambridge blazer, smile caught between hope and discipline. Who is he? Andrew's voice dropped. Me. Marcellus stared, disbelief flooding in. The man in the photo was maybe 20, eyes brimming with the same spark he saw in his own reflection. Ezra Langston, the erased name, the student Cambridge denied ever existed. I was working on my thesis, Ezra explained, on institutional bias and systemic data manipulation, long before anyone had a word for it. Built an early algorithm. Crude by today's standards, but dangerous enough. Marcellus flipped to the next page. Thesis drafts covered in professor annotations. Many notes were dismissive. One said, overreaching, not academically appropriate. Ezra kept going. I submitted my draft. 3 days later, I was accused of forging data. I asked for a hearing. They denied me, said I'd violated protocol, pulled my scholarship, revoked my visa. I was out of the country in 72 hours. But your name, Marcellus said. There's no record of you. Ezra smiled, sad and sharp. Exactly. They rewrote the directory, removed me from course logs, even the yearbook, buried me under layers of red tape. I didn't just get expelled, I got erased. Marcellus felt a chill crawl down his spine. History's repeating. Ezra nodded. And that's why you have to finish what I couldn't. But to do that, you need to understand the full story, including what they were really protecting. He motioned toward a metal filing cabinet in the corner, dust-covered, locked with a rusted latch. You're not the first to uncover something they didn't want seen, Ezra said, and you won't be the last. But what's in there, what Cambridge called Project Mercy, wasn't just about students, it was a whole academic laundering system. He handed Marcellus a small crowbar. It's yours to open. If you're ready. Marcellus didn't hesitate. The cabinet creaked open with a groan. Inside were sealed envelopes, film reels, coded notebooks. One thick binder sat on top, labeled in bold red, Project Mercy, do not open. He lifted it carefully and opened the first page. Immediately, a pattern emerged. Lists of student names, categorized by race, region, and background. Scoring adjustments, notations next to black and brown names. Intervene if top 10%. Monitor tone in essays. Legacy override, pending donation. Marcellus flipped page after page, rage building in silent waves. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't an isolated case. It was a system, a doctrine. Generations of gatekeeping, written in academic language, and dressed in statistical neutrality. He looked up. Why haven't you released this? Ezra's eyes hardened. Because truth without protection is suicide. Back then, no internet, no leaks, no platforms. If I'd gone public, they'd have crushed me harder. Now, you have reach. A network. People watching. Marcellus felt the weight of it settling onto his chest. Every insult he'd endured, every doubt cast on his intelligence, every closed door. It wasn't just coincidence. It was legacy. A tradition masked as merit. He turned to the back of the binder and found a familiar name. Charles Whitford. Annotated as a trusted evaluator. Trained in selective intervention practices since 19... Marcellus stared at the note beside Whitford's name. Strong bias indicator. Use in cases where subtle redirection is needed. Subtle redirection. Like telling him to drop the class on his first day. Like questioning his intelligence in front of his peers. Like launching a plagiarism inquiry instead of celebrating innovation. Marcellus snapped the binder shut, heart pounding. We have to show this. Ezra shook his head. Not through the university. They'll just bury it again.
And where?
Ezra hesitated, then said, there's a summit next week. Tech ethics, education reform, streamed globally. You apply with your algorithm, not your story. If you make it past screening, you speak on the final day. You drop the bomb on stage, and no one can silence you. Marcellus blinked. And if I don't get in, Ezra smiled faintly, then we find another way. But you'll get in. They crave innovation, just not when it bites. Marcellus tucked the Project Mercy file into his backpack. I'll rewrite my algorithm pitch tonight. Careful, Ezra warned. Once you go public, there's no retreat. They'll come for you harder, and you'll be alone. No, Marcellus said. I won't be. For the first time, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like the system's reckoning. As he exited the church, clouds rolling above Cambridge's skyline, a new urgency burned inside him. This wasn't just his battle anymore. It never had been. But just before he turned the corner, something strange caught his eye. A plaque near the church's entrance, faded and half buried beneath moss. He leaned down and wiped it clean. It read, Langston Memorial Archive. In honor of those who dared. Marcellus stared at the name. Langston. Ezra's name. But Ezra had told him no one remembered. No one honored him. He took a picture, texted it to Ezra. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, Ezra replied, "That's not mine. I never knew it existed." Beneath the church's floorboards, a second archive is discovered, sealed tight, unmarked, and untouched for decades. And inside it, a secret about Cambridge that even Ezra doesn't know. Beneath the rotting floorboards of the old church, Marcellus had uncovered truth. Now, standing at his makeshift workstation deep in the university's forgotten storage wing, he began building something no one at Cambridge had ever expected, a system that could outthink the one that had spent centuries keeping students like him out. With the Project Mercy documents secured, and the Summit application submitted under a neutral title, Adaptive Evaluation Through Contextual Intelligence, Marcellus locked himself in a world of code, logic, and purpose. The air was stale. The overhead lights flickered every so often, but none of it mattered. He barely ate, barely slept. Each keystroke rewrote part of the structure that had tried to crush him. His new algorithm wasn't just a refinement of Ezra's buried system. It was a rebellion cloaked in machine learning. He called it Claire Contextual Learning, an inclusive review engine. SheLayer didn't just identify discrimination. It corrected it in real time. It neutralized name-based grading bias, leveled language interpretation for multilingual students, and flagged subjectivity in professor feedback patterns. It used layered data to account for social, economic, and educational disparity, not as an excuse but as context for performance. Claire didn't ask who a student was. It asked what they knew, how they grew, and how far they had traveled to arrive in that lecture seat. And it worked. Within 10 days, Marcellus had a working prototype. On old borrowed equipment, in a room full of dust and silence, he built a living, breathing correction to centuries of discrimination. He fed in anonymized data from the Project Mercy files, and Claire visualized the disparities with devastating clarity. Same score sheets, different outcomes. Legacy students praised for brevity, black students penalized for tone. Poor students marked aggressive for assertiveness. The system learned, adapted, recalculated. It showed what equitable grading could look like, what fairness should feel like. It was technical and humane, cold code with a beating heart. For the first time, Marcellus didn't feel like he was surviving. He was winning. Word began to spread. Whispers at first, students mentioning the grant model in study groups. A visiting PhD candidate from MIT asked to see a preview. Marcellus agreed, reluctantly, and within 24 hours that candidate sent a message back. This isn't just a paper, it's policy, it's the future. And that's when things shifted. For the first time, Marcellus wasn't just a rumor. He was a movement. An anonymous student created a site called Stand with Marcellus, a place to share their own academic horror stories. Within 3 days, it had over 18,000 posts. Students from all over the UK and the US wrote about racist advisors, biased grading, silenced complaints. Faculty tried to block the domain on campus servers, but the posts kept multiplying. The silence had been broken. Marcellus stayed quiet publicly, but he watched it unfold like a storm gathering momentum. Claire had started as his defense. Now it was becoming everyone's revolution. Even professors began to waver. One lecturer from political theory left an anonymous tip on the site. "You're right, Project Mercy existed. They trained us to look for undesirable cognitive behaviors. I didn't speak up. I should have." Cambridge was panicking, but pretending not to. The Vice-Chancellor's office issued a vague statement. "We are proud of our inclusive academic environment, and will continue to investigate any concerns brought to our attention." Marcellus read it, and laughed bitterly. They weren't investigating. They were waiting for him to fall, for momentum to slow, for the institution's weight to settle everything back into quiet. But he wasn't going quiet. He was preparing for the summit. The final event, the Global Ethics in Technology and Education Conference, was set in London, 3 days away. A last-minute cancellation had created an opening on the schedule, and Marcellus had filled it. He was listed anonymously on the program as independent scholar. No school name, no background, just a 30-minute time slot in the final keynote series. Cambridge couldn't block it. The summit was privately organized, independent. The press would be there, Silicon Valley, think tanks, government observers. If he presented Claire successfully, the truth wouldn't just be seen, it would be backed. And for the first time, Marcellus allowed himself a moment to breathe. That night, back in his dorm for the first time in days, He packed his bag, multiple copies of the code, 3 drives, a printed outline, a portable display. He was ready. He even allowed himself to open a congratulatory message from a Nigerian student he had never met. Thank you for showing them we're more than their quotas. He clicked his phone off, and then it buzzed again. This time, it wasn't encouragement. It was an email. Subject, Immigration Status Review. Action required. Marcellus froze. The sender was a UKVI contact he had never seen before. The body of the message was brief. Dear Mr. Grant, we regret to inform you that your current visa status has been flagged for immediate reassessment due to institutional review activity. Please be advised that your right to remain in the UK may be affected. You are requested to appear at the Regional Immigration Office within 48 hours. His throat went dry. He reread it twice, 3 times. It didn't make sense until it did. Cambridge had no authority to cancel a visa, but they could whisper. And now, they were using the state itself to finish what they couldn't kill academically. Strip him of his legal status. Make the summit impossible. He forwarded the email to Eliza Moore with a single line. They're going for the nuclear option. Within minutes her reply came. Don't go to that appointment. It's not about status, it's about surveillance. I'll explain in person. A moment later Ezra's call came through. You saw it? Marcellus answered, barely keeping his voice steady. They're trying to deport me before I can speak. Ezra didn't hesitate. It's textbook. Happened in 1980 to another black student who tried to report grading bias. They cited academic misconduct and terminated his visa within 72 hours. Marcellus sat on the edge of his bed, hands shaking. What do I do? Ezra's voice dropped. You get to that summit. You speak, and if they try to block you, we leak the entire Project Mercy archive. Marcellus nodded slowly. It had come to that. He was no longer just fighting a school. He was fighting an empire of silence. Just as he begins backing up his presentation files, a system alert flashes across his laptop. His personal student profile is gone, erased. His name, records, and enrollment have been deleted from Cambridge's database entirely. The system alert blinked twice, and then vanished, but the damage was already done. Marcellus stared at the empty screen in disbelief, mouth slightly open, hands frozen over the keyboard. His Cambridge student profile was gone, not suspended, not blocked, deleted. No enrollment record, no classes, no academic ID. His digital identity within the university had been wiped clean. He refreshed the portal again. Nothing. A hollow pit formed in his stomach. His name was no longer listed in the student directory. He typed faster, pulled up the course archive, searched for his submitted assignments. Gone. The grading portal? Gone. His email account? Already disabled. The algorithm they used to score and admit had now been used to erase. They weren't waiting for the summit. They were pulling the trigger now. Just then a knock hit the door. Not soft.
Not friendly.
Hard. Rhythmic. Marcellus's breath caught. He opened the door slowly, and immediately felt the weight of authority pressing into the room. 2 men stood in the hallway, both in dark suits holding UK visas and immigration badges. Their faces unreadable. Mr. Grant? One asked, his tone cool, almost automated. Yes, Marcellus said slowly, gripping the edge of the door. You'll need to come with us. There's been a flag on your immigration status. Standard procedure. No warning? No legal notice? The taller man looked at him with bland indifference. We're simply following instructions from a collaborative institutional review. You can contest the issue after processing. After processing. That meant detainment. Marcellus didn't resist. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he understood. This wasn't about law. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. They had sent these men not because he was a threat, but because he had refused to be afraid. He was led through campus in broad daylight, past the quad, past lecture halls, past students. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Whispers trailed behind him like smoke. By the time they reached the black government vehicle parked outside the main gate, a video was already climbing the ranks on Twitter. Cambridge student arrested by immigration fraud suspect. The footage was only 12 seconds long, but it was enough. The narrative had begun. At the UKVI field office, he was fingerprinted, stripped of his phone, denied access to a lawyer. They gave him a gray sweatshirt and a metal chair in a holding room that smelled like steel and damp paperwork. The questions came slowly. Why was your academic record inaccessible? Why was your visa reassessed? Did you enter the country under false pretenses of scholarship? Each question cut like it had been designed not for discovery, but for destruction. Marcellus answered carefully. I was a Prestwich scholar. My record was deleted by the university. The officer didn't blink. Your school has issued no formal statement to corroborate that. Because they're complicit. The officer paused. Are you accusing the University of Cambridge of deliberate academic sabotage? Marcellus leaned forward. Yes. They wrote something down and said nothing for 3 more hours. Meanwhile, outside the sterile walls of his detainment, the story metastasized. Headlines spun fast and brutal. Student prodigy, or academic fraud. Cambridge silent amid visa arrest. Controversial algorithm. Linked to immigration probe. Insider, Grant may have fabricated background. The whispers that once filled lecture halls now roared across social media. Cambridge issued a cold, calculated statement. We are cooperating fully with UK authorities regarding recent concerns raised about the academic record and enrollment of Mr. Marcellus Grant. We have no further comment at this time. Marcellus read that line printed on the news bulletin inside the holding room. He stared at it long and hard, the heat rising behind his eyes. No defense. No acknowledgement of the theft, the threats, the sabotage. Just a clean break. They had removed him from the system, and now they were trying to remove him from the country. Somewhere deep in the machine, someone had flipped the switch that erased him. Someone had pressed delete. He could feel it. The war wasn't just academic anymore. They were playing it out through the state. He didn't sleep that night. He laid on the cot, staring at the cracked ceiling tile, every second stretching into minutes. He replayed Ezra's warnings, Eliza's risk, his mother's face the last time he saw her, the image of Dean Holloway lurking near the lab. They weren't just afraid of Claire. They were terrified of what happened if it survived him. But as Cambridge tightened its grip, something unexpected happened outside. The videos of his detainment, initially spread by curiosity, had ignited something else. Anger. And then resistance. Stand with Marcellus began trending again. But this time, it wasn't just students. It was professors, activists, civil rights lawyers, tech CEOs. His name ricocheted across timelines and inboxes like a shot fired at the empire. Thousands demanded his release. Petitions flooded UKVI's inboxes. And just when the noise reached its peak, when journalists began circling like sharks looking for something to sink their teeth into, someone tipped the scales. A brown envelope arrived at the office of investigative journalist Simone Price at The Independent. Inside, a single flash drive and a printed note. Tell the truth. The files speak for themselves. She inserted the drive. Dozens of files open. Voice recordings. Digital logs. Faculty notes. Internal university communications. And a copy of the full Project Mercy database. Simone stared at the screen, as the truth unraveled like a noose slipping off a neck. This wasn't a rogue student fabricating brilliance. This was an institution building walls to protect its illusion of supremacy. That night, The Independent published an exclusive titled, Erased by Design, Cambridge's Quiet War on a Black Prodigy. Within hours, it had over 2.3 million reads. The public tide surged. Cambridge tried damage control, but the screenshots were already viral. The redacted emails weren't redacted enough. The audio clips were undeniable. And in the center of it all, Marcellus Grant, still sitting in a gray room, still waiting, until, without warning, a new officer opened the door. Mr. Grant, you're being released. Marcellus sat up. Why? No charges, no visa violation. Someone overstepped. That was all they said. No apology, no explanation, just release. As he walked out of the building into the gray London light, flanked by cameras and chants, the crowd parted. A student handed him a phone. A video was already playing. Simone Price. At her desk. Speaking clearly to the camera. We've reviewed the evidence. This wasn't an investigation. It was a hit job. And someone inside Cambridge orchestrated the entire takedown. As Marcellus looks at the crowd, a young girl pushes through and whispers, They found the original video. The one you never uploaded. The night your project was stolen. By the time Marcellus stepped back onto the street outside the immigration facility, the world had changed. He was no longer just a name whispered in academic halls or a student battling quiet sabotage. He was now the face of something undeniable, an institution cornered by its own shadow. The flash drive sent to Simone Price had detonated like a truth bomb. The Project Mercy files laid bare every concealed prejudice Cambridge had carefully curated over decades. Racist faculty notes, flagged admissions based on surname and geography, internal memos that discussed containing optics. For decades it had been tradition. Now it was exposed. Simone's article didn't just go viral. It splintered the web. Screenshots of redacted Cambridge emails, names blurred but timing intact, trended under hashtags like Ghost of Cambridge, Black Brains Erased, and Marcellus did that. TikTok creators dissected the documents, news anchors quoted excerpts with visible discomfort, podcasters tore apart the university's legacy. Entire Reddit threads were dedicated to decoding every hidden file in the archive. In every headline, every share, every furious comment, one truth kept surfacing. They tried to silence him because he was brilliant and black. Back on campus, Cambridge responded with the grace of a burning building. A press release was issued within hours of the article's publication. The chancellor's signature sat under a hollow apology. Cambridge University takes matters of academic equity very seriously. We are reviewing historical materials to better understand institutional failings. We cannot comment on individual student matters at this time. No names. No mention of Project Mercy. No acknowledgement of Marcellus. The release was signed, sealed, and sterilized. But the world wasn't buying it. Within hours, the university's social media accounts were flooded with comments from students, alumni, and academics around the globe. This isn't review. This is reputation management. You deleted him and thought we wouldn't notice. Diversity isn't a marketing line. It's accountability. On campus, protest signs filled the quads. We are not your exceptions. Delete racism, not students. Marcellus Grant still exists. Students staged walkouts. Faculty were split. Some demanding resignations from top administrators. Others retreating into silence or defending the institution with desperate emails to donors. By morning, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and even Al Jazeera had picked up the story. BBC aired a special titled, Brains and Barriers, The Marcellus Grant Fallout. For the first time, the glossy facade of Cambridge prestige was cracking, and the world could see the rot underneath. But for Marcellus, the victory was not clean. Though he'd been released from UKVI custody, the university issued an immediate campus-wide bulletin. Effective immediately, Marcellus Grant is restricted from entering university grounds pending a full institutional review. He wasn't expelled, not suspended, just barred. An invisible wall raised between him and the place he once called his academic home. He sat in a cafe just beyond the campus perimeter, laptop open, headphones in, watching as his name became a rallying cry. Simone called him directly that afternoon. Her voice carried that reporter's mix of urgency and compassion. They've hired a legal team to counter the leak. But it's too late. The documents are everywhere now. You did it. Marcellus didn't say anything at first. He stared out the window, watching students stream past with signs, chants, energy. I don't feel like I did it, he said quietly. Why not? Because I didn't want to be famous for being erased. There was a pause on the other end. Simone finally said, You weren't erased. You were revealed. That scares them more. Before she could hang up, Marcellus asked, What do I do now? They won't let me back in. I have no university, no legal standing in the UK, and Claire is still in beta. She didn't answer right away. Then, check your email. Now. He opened it. Subject line, Invitation to Present, Global Systems Summit 2025, Ethics in AI Track. Beneath it, a formal letter. Dear Mr. Grant, we would be honored to host your presentation on Claire Contextual Learning and Inclusive Review Engine as part of our closing keynote series. Your work represents a critical evolution in the field of equitable AI. The event would take place in Geneva in 2 weeks. Speakers included pioneers from Harvard, Oxford, DeepMind, and the United Nations. Tech investors, ministers of education, and human rights lawyers would be present. Simone's voice echoed softly in his ear. They're not just inviting you to speak. They're inviting you to lead. Marcellus leaned back in his chair. He wasn't expecting this. He had been so focused on survival that he hadn't imagined a platform outside of Cambridge, a space where Claire could live and grow, a future. He forwarded the email to Eliza, writing only, It's happening. She replied almost instantly, Told you it was bigger than them. But even in this high, a knot tightened in his gut, because as the news exploded, and the walls of Cambridge trembled. The institution had gone quiet. Too quiet. No counters. No lawsuits. No interviews. It was the calm before something. He turned back to his laptop, loading the Claire archive again, triple-checking that every backup file was encrypted, every presentation slide formatted, every diagram annotated. The summit was more than a presentation. It was his line in the sand. He clicked open the media folder to prep some early visuals, and froze. At the bottom of the directory, a new file had appeared, timestamped hours earlier. Stolen footage. His heartbeat slowed. He clicked play. The video opened with grainy footage. His dorm room, the night it had been ransacked. The angle was high, as if from a ceiling corner. Marcellus on his bed. Then shadows moving. The door opening. Gloved hands. And then Whitford, clearly visible. Rummaging. Taking the laptop. Swapping drives. The file had audio. The unmistakable voice of Charles Whitford, murmuring, "We can't let this go public. I don't care what Ezra left behind. Burn it all." Marcellus sat motionless. This wasn't just sabotage. This was premeditated theft by the university's most protected professor. Who sent the file? He checked the sender. No reply. Alum archive. No name. No trace. But the video undeniable. The summit may now be a stage for redemption. But someone deep within Cambridge just activated a legal strike, filing an injunction to block Claire as stolen intellectual property, claiming the university owns every line of code. The glass dome of the Geneva Convention Center shimmered like a crown beneath the morning light. Flags from dozens of nations flanked the entrance, fluttering in a soft alpine breeze. Inside, corridors buzzed with executives, scientists, policy leaders, and the sharp scent of freshly printed programs. Everyone who mattered in the world of ethical tech was there. Everyone but Marcellus Grant. His name, once confirmed for a closing keynote slot, had disappeared from the official agenda. The email had come the night before. Following legal guidance, we regret to inform you that your participation is no longer confirmed. The conference cannot host work currently under intellectual property dispute. Cambridge had made its move. With a single injunction filed in the British courts, they claimed Claire as institutionally developed material, citing university servers used in its initial design. Despite the public backlash, the legal precision worked. The summit organizers buckled. The stage once open to him was now walled off. But Marcellus wasn't done. He arrived at the summit in a borrowed suit and a press badge registered under a friend's name, Elias Moore, the cousin of Eliza Moore, who had secured the credential hours earlier. His real ID tucked deep in his bag. No spotlight, no greeting, no stage access. But he was inside. And he wasn't alone. Waiting at the base of the main hall escalator stood Eliza, dressed like every other academic blazer, lanyard purpose in her stride. Behind her was Simone Price with a rolling suitcase and a quiet nod. To the side, a group of international grad students huddled, holding tablets and whispering directions. A plan was already in motion. "They've silenced speakers before," Eliza said, slipping him a flash drive. "But not during open mic session breaks. You get 5 minutes on the side stage. If you can hook them, you'll be impossible to ignore." Simone added, "The injunction only works on official programming, but if this becomes news in real time, they can't erase it without proof of retaliation." It was a loophole. A fragile, desperate, perfect loophole. Marcellus glanced at the small platform tucked near the panel exhibition booths, a designated innovation showcase space. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't streamed. But if he reached the right audience, it wouldn't matter. They moved quickly. 5 students uploaded the presentation to mirrored drives. 2 prepped the live version. A mobile hotspot bypassed the conference network. Simone pulled strings to alert reporters nearby. It all felt impossible. Until it wasn't. At 3:52 p.m., just after a panel titled "Decentralizing Access to AI," a tech journalist from Berlin walked past the side stage and paused. Marcellus stood there, 1 foot on the stairs, a microphone in hand. No script, no slide, just Claire. The journalist whispered something to a colleague. Another turned. Then another. By the time Marcellus cleared his throat and began speaking, 30 people stood watching. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "My name," he said slowly, "was removed from the Cambridge database 3 weeks ago. So I'll start with something the system can't delete. My voice." Silence fell. "I built a tool called Claire, Contextual Learning, an inclusive review engine. It uses machine learning to identify and correct racial and socioeconomic bias in academic evaluation. It doesn't predict who will succeed. It reveals who the system was designed to fail. He clicked. A screen behind him lit up. Graphs. Algorithms. Real student examples. Side-by-side comparisons of subjective grading disparities. Claire doesn't grade people. It exposes how people are graded. The small crowd swelled. A few Cambridge students, quietly attending the conference, exchanged stunned glances. Someone whispered, "Is this him?" He continued, hands shaking only slightly. This tool was developed using data collected, then hidden by Cambridge. They claim it now belongs to them. But I built it. I lived it. And I watched it erase students who looked like me long before I ever had the language to name it. He stepped forward. "I'm not here to win a prize. I'm not here to reclaim a scholarship. I'm here to offer a mirror to an industry that says meritocracy and means legacy, that says diversity and means exception, that tells kids they're lucky to be here, and never stops to ask why they weren't invited in the first place." The crowd kept growing. Journalists lifted cameras. Phones streamed live. A developer from Seoul clapped once, then twice. Then others joined. Eliza motioned to Simone. "Send it now." Within seconds, the feed hit social media. Claire Live trended within 20 minutes. By the time Marcellus hit his final slide, the summit's main auditorium had half emptied, as attendees rushed to the side stage. And then just as he finished, the message arrived. A conference staffer sprinted toward the technical booth, whispered, panicked. The screen behind Marcellus blinked, then cut to black. A summit-wide alert appeared. Emergency legal action. The University of Cambridge has issued a protective injunction against unauthorized demonstration of proprietary code currently under investigation. Presentation must cease immediately. Gasps erupted. Eliza stepped onto the stage. "This is retaliation," Simone yelled from the crowd. "We have footage. We have documents. He owns this." The staffer reached for the projector cord. But Marcellus raised a hand. He didn't flinch, didn't panic. He simply turned back to the crowd and said, "If the code is theirs, let them explain what they did to hide it, to bury it, to erase it." He opened his laptop, held it up. "This drive contains not just Claire, but every digital fingerprint that proves what they tried to do. It's being uploaded right now to 25 independent servers. Kill the screen. Shut the mic. It won't matter." The audience erupted in applause. A representative from the European Commission on Education turned to a colleague. "We need to see that tool." A tech investor whispered to her assistant, "Schedule a meeting, now." And then a second message came in. Not from Cambridge. From a UK judge. Emergency injunction denied. Code presentation protected under Independent Research Fair Use Clause. No IP violation confirmed. Simone read it aloud. The cheer was deafening. Marcellus stood motionless. For the first time, no one was trying to silence him. They were asking to hear more. As the crowd surrounds Marcellus with support, a senior summit official whispers urgently, "Cambridge's legal team just filed a new motion. This time they're targeting your visa. Again." The summit footage reached 1 million views within 12 hours. By the end of the first week, it had passed 30 million. The world had seen it. Marcellus Grant, standing alone at a side stage with nothing but a borrowed microphone and an algorithm that stripped the skin off centuries of academic deceit. Claire wasn't just a tool. It was a testimony. His voice wasn't trembling. His hands weren't unsure. And when the injunction flashed across the screen behind him, he didn't back down. The resistance became the rallying point. Clips of his speech were dubbed into Spanish, Hindi, Swahili, and Arabic. TikTok turned his line, "Claire doesn't grade people. It reveals how people are graded," into a global slogan. Hashtags erupted. Claire for classrooms. Marcellus was erased. We want him back. A single Reddit post with the caption, "Cambridge built a wall. He built a system," received over 500,000 upvotes. But more than noise, something else emerged. Action. 3 days after the summit, an online petition titled "Reinstate Marcellus Grant and Publicly Apologize" hit 2 million signatures. In 1 week, it passed 5. By day 9, it was endorsed by 18 Nobel laureates, over 1,300 university professors across 4 continents, and 4 former heads of state. Investors followed. Emails flooded his inbox. Venture capital firms, tech incubators, education equity foundations. Most came with subject lines like "Fund Claire" Or how can we support your mission? Even his old Prestwich program director, silent during the worst of it, forwarded an offer from Stanford, full ride PhD, immediate placement, no conditions. Yale followed.
Then NYU. Then Oxford.
With a personal note from the vice-chancellor stating, "We deeply regret what our peer institution has done to you. Come show us what Cambridge tried to hide." But Marcellus didn't respond. Not yet. He sat alone in a small apartment, outside London, using a burner laptop and encrypted Wi-Fi, watching it all unfold. Claire's source code had been posted to a private peer-reviewed forum. Already, schools in Nigeria, Chile, and New Zealand were running beta tests. The system worked, and more importantly, it was being trusted. But with the rise came new weight. A BBC journalist asked him live on air, "Are you proud?" Marcellus had stared at the camera for a moment before answering. "I'm tired." She'd blinked, unsure of how to follow that. And she didn't have to, because right after, his phone pinged with a new email from an encrypted address. Subject line, "Request for private meeting." Sender, Professor Charles Whitford. The man who told him to drop the class. The man who watched him be humiliated, erased and detained, and said nothing. Marcellus stared at the name. He didn't open the message right away. Instead, he called Eliza. "He wants to meet," he said, tone flat. There was silence on the other end. Then Eliza said, "He doesn't want to apologize. He wants to control what comes next." "I know," Marcellus replied, "but I'm not doing this for revenge. I want to hear what fear sounds like when it finally knocks." He opened the message. It was short. "We both know the institution failed. I may have been part of that. I can't undo what's been done, but I'd like to talk, privately. You deserve that much." See, the arrogance was still there, cloaked in formality. But something else lingered in the subtext. Maybe not regret, but worry. The kind of worry that came when you realized the thing you tried to silence had outgrown your reach. They met in a quiet library room, neutral ground. Whitford arrived first. Same blazer, same posture, but something in his eyes had cracked. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. Marcellus didn't sit right away. "I wanted to see what a professor sounds like when the world finally reads his footnotes." Whitford didn't flinch. "I deserve that." Marcellus sat. "No, you deserve to be forgotten. But that's not who I am." They sat in tense quiet. Then Whitford spoke. "I was told, warned that if we didn't contain your work, donors would walk. Faculty would revolt. The system would shift. So you chose tradition over truth." Whitford nodded slowly. "I chose Cambridge." Marcellus leaned forward. "No, you chose white Cambridge. The version that protects its legacy by sacrificing voices that disrupt it." The professor exhaled. "And yet, you didn't burn it down. You built something better." There was a long pause. Then Whitford reached into his bag. "A letter. Signed. Sealed. I've submitted my resignation," he said. "It'll be public in 48 hours. I named Project Mercy. I named who blocked the investigation. I named myself." Marcellus took the envelope. Not out of trust, but to hold proof. Whitford added, "They'll offer you reinstatement. Quietly. With terms. I suggest you decline it. Because it'll clear your conscience." Marcellus asked. "No," Whitford said, "because you're too big for it now." That night, Marcellus walked along the Thames, the city humming around him. He thought about power, about how institutions didn't rot from one person, but from silence. And he thought about Claire, not as revenge, not as proof, but as a path forward for students like him, long after his name faded from headlines. When he returned to his apartment, a new email waited. From the Chancellor of Cambridge. "Mr. Grant, we are issuing a formal invitation to return to the university. With full rights restored, we hope you'll accept and help us move forward together." He read it 3 times, then clicked reply. He writes just 2 words and hits send before walking away from the screen, as the inbox explodes again, this time with an offer that could make Claire global overnight. The Chancellor's email still sat open on Marcellus's cracked laptop screen, the cold blue light casting a faint glow across the small apartment. "We hope you'll accept." The words looked almost pathetic in their diplomatic politeness, hollow in their attempt to disguise desperation. Cambridge wasn't welcoming him back. They were trying to cage the wildfire before it spread any further. Marcellus had typed only 2 words before hitting send. Too late. He didn't wait for a reply. He closed the laptop and let silence settle around him. He could feel something shifting. something heavier than revenge, deeper than vindication. Cambridge was cracking from the inside, fissures widening with every truth that surfaced. But one truth still needed to be confronted. Professor Charles Whitford. Marcellus had faced systems, walls, policies, and the weight of centuries, but he hadn't yet faced the man who embodied every barrier he'd collided with. The man who told him publicly, confidently, that he didn't belong here. The man who watched him drown and never extended a hand. A message arrived from Whitford's assistant the next morning. Professor Whitford requests a final in-person conversation. He will meet you in Lecture Hall A. The same hall. The same floor. The same air that once suffocated him. Marcellus stood outside the aging wooden double doors. Memories crawled along the edges of his consciousness. The whispers, the suppressed laughter, the humiliation that felt like a sentence handed down with academic authority. His pulse was steady this time, not nervous, just certain. He pushed open the door. The hall was mostly empty. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the rows of seats. Whitford stood at the front, adjusting papers on the podium, as if preparing for a lecture. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing. Age clung to him in a way Marcellus hadn't noticed before. When Whitford turned, his expression was composed but strained. "You came," he said softly. Marcellus didn't sit. He remained near the center aisle, the exact spot where he'd been standing that first day when Whitford humiliated him. He wanted the symmetry. He wanted the memory to tremble. "Say what you called me here for," Marcellus replied. Whitford walked toward him slowly, hands clasped behind his back like a professor trying to appear calm before a difficult viva. "I won't insult you by pretending this is an apology," Whitford began. "You and I are past the point where apologies change anything." "Correct," Marcellus said. Whitford hesitated, surprised he didn't get an easy opening. "You've changed the conversation around this university," he continued. "Around higher education as a whole. Whether you intended to or not, you sparked a global debate. And while Cambridge is navigating the consequences, it's clear that we need to shift, adapt, reform." Marcellus raised an eyebrow. "And where do I fit into that sentence?" Whitford inhaled slowly. "I'm offering you the chance to come back, not as a student, as a partner, a collaborator, a co-architect of the new data ethics division." Marcellus blinked once, then stared. Whitford took that as encouragement, and continued. "You've demonstrated vision, tenacity, brilliance. In spite of everything, you've shown the world what a Cambridge mind can accomplish. Claire could be integrated into our curriculum, refined with institutional support. You would have a team, funding, a proper lab, and Cambridge would benefit from the restoration of its image." There it was, the real motive. "Say it without packaging," Marcellus said. "You want me because you need me to fix the story." Whitford's eyes flickered. "This situation has grown beyond anyone's expectations. The university must evolve, and I would make a very convenient symbol," Marcellus interrupted. "The triumphant return. The forgiven genius. The partnership that proves Cambridge listens." The words hung in the air like the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Whitford tried again. "If you return, if we present a united front, the narrative will shift. You'll have resources, prestige, a platform far greater than the summit." "What part of this sounds like you taking accountability?" Marcellus asked quietly. Whitford's jaw tightened. "I submitted my resignation." "No," Marcellus corrected. "You submitted a letter to protect your legacy, not to repair mine." Whitford exhaled sharply, as if wounded. "You don't understand what this institution means. We carry centuries. We carry expectations, donors, governments, powerful alumni. To challenge that machinery, you mean to challenge whiteness where it sits most comfortably," Marcellus said. Whitford flinched at the word, the way men do when confronted with what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. "You're angry," he said, voice softening. "I'm aware," Marcellus replied. Whitford stepped forward. "Marcellus, I'm offering you something few people in your situation ever receive. A chance to rewrite the terms, to enter the system not as an outsider, but as a force within." Marcellus held his gaze. "But the system doesn't want to change. It wants new shields. It wants new faces for its brochure. It wants to use me as evidence that it is capable of reform without actually reforming." Whitford opened his mouth, but Marcellus continued. "You didn't call me here because you believe in my work. You called me here because you're afraid of what comes next if you don't align with me." Whitford froze. That silence was the closest thing to honesty the professor had ever given him. Something inside Marcellus, something small, something old, something that had once wanted validation, finally dissolved. He stepped forward, standing inches from Whitford, looking the man directly in the eyes. "I am not your redemption arc," Marcellus said quietly, "and I won't let you turn my survival story into Cambridge's PR strategy." Whitford swallowed hard, the sound echoing faintly. "Then what do you want?" the professor whispered. Marcellus turned away and walked toward the podium, toward the place where Whitford once wounded him in front of an entire class. He rested one hand on it, remembering the echo of those words on that first day. "You should drop the class." He pressed the button on the small panel beneath the podium. A camera mounted high on the wall, linked alive. A red light appeared. Recording.
Broadcasting.
"Leave." Whitford's breath caught. "Marcellus, what are you doing?" Marcellus faced the camera. Shoulders steady, eyes clear. "You asked what I want," he said. "I want the world to hear exactly what I'm about to say." Whitford moved forward, panic finally breaking through the facade. "Stop this. You don't know what this—" Marcellus raised his hand. "It's already live, Professor." Whitford froze. Marcellus turned back to the camera, voice calm, strong, certain. "I was told I didn't belong here. I was pushed, erased, detained, and silenced. Not because I failed, but because I succeeded in a space designed to doubt me. Cambridge offered me a partnership today, a chance to come back under their control, on their terms." He paused, then delivered the sentence that would ignite headlines around the world. "So here's my answer. I will return only if Cambridge admits publicly that its systems were built to discriminate, and commits on record to dismantling them under independent oversight. No conditions, no hiding, no rewriting the narrative." The hall was silent. Whitford looked stunned. Marcellus stepped closer to the camera. "And if they refuse," he said softly, "then I'll build something stronger than Cambridge ever imagined, and students won't need institutions like this anymore." Before he can end the broadcast, a notification flashes across the screen. Cambridge's Board of Governors has called for an emergency meeting, and Whitford has been summoned to testify against him. The footage of Marcellus's on-camera ultimatum spread through the academic world like fire racing up dry ivy. Universities that once sat in silent judgment now scrambled for relevance, releasing half-hearted statements about reflecting deeply and valuing inclusion. But none could outrun the tidal wave of accountability that had begun crashing onto Cambridge's marble doorstep. Within 72 hours of the broadcast, the United Nations Educational Ethics Committee issued a formal inquiry. Allegations of systemic racism, suppression of academic freedom, and intellectual erasure, involving a member institution of international standing, shall be investigated. By the end of the week, a hearing was scheduled in The Hague. Cambridge University was officially under international review. The case wasn't criminal, it was reputational. But in the world of elite academia, reputation was currency. And this scandal was inflation at its most brutal. The hearing was live-streamed, broadcast rights were sold. Academic panels from Argentina to South Africa paused operations to watch. It wasn't just Cambridge being scrutinized, it was a 900-year-old blueprint being dragged into the light. The panel was composed of international education leaders, former deans, equity scholars, human rights lawyers. Their questions were sharp, their tone clinical, but the testimonies were not. The first to speak was Ezra Jennings's sister, now in her 60s. She clutched the only photograph of Ezra ever taken on campus. Her voice cracked as she told the story of a brilliant black mathematician, erased not by mistake, but by coordinated design. He never got his thesis back, never got his future back. Next was Dr. Eliza Moore. Calm, controlled, devastating. She explained how she had been warned that supporting Marcellus would jeopardize her tenure trajectory. She described faculty group chats that circulated memes mocking his accent. She described a culture of strategic indifference. Then came current students, some white, some black, many brown, each with their own scars. A girl from Manchester, whose scholarship interviewers grilled her about gang culture. A South Asian student who scored top in his cohort, but was advised to tone down his ambition. A black student who found accidental emails calling him optically useful. Each story added weight. Each word chipped away at the fortress Cambridge had spent centuries fortifying. And then came the digital evidence. Simone Price presented a curated file called the Whitford Tapes. Anonymous recordings, internal emails, deleted server logs, each one a nail in the coffin of institutional credibility. A slide showed the Project Mercy archive, highlighting redacted records from 1973, 1996, 2005, and now, Marcellus had given the committee full access. He didn't appear in person, not yet, but his presence saturated every moment. The final testimony was unexpected. Professor Charles Whitford, summoned under subpoena, sat alone in a high-backed chair, his hair disheveled, his voice quieter than usual. He looked like a man trying to reconcile his name with a history he could no longer bend. I failed him, Whitford admitted, eyes locked on the table. But more than that, I served a system that only works when voices like his are left out. The room went silent. He continued. We didn't just erase one student. We erased generations. We called it tradition. We called it prestige. But it was cowardice masked as standard. When asked if he believed Cambridge could repair what had been broken, he answered, only if the institution stops pretending it is owed forgiveness before it has earned accountability. The verdict wasn't binding, but it was searing. The Ethics Committee declared Cambridge in violation of global academic ethical codes on 5 counts: bias in admission, systemic obstruction of racial minorities, retaliation against whistleblowers, intellectual property misappropriation, and manipulation of academic records for political safety. The world reacted fast. Harvard withdrew from a joint research partnership. The University of Cape Town froze its faculty exchange program. Several major publishing houses paused all journal collaborations pending review of past peer review practices. Cambridge's stock, metaphorically speaking, was plummeting. For Marcellus, it was vindication, but it wasn't peace. He remained distant, away from camera crews, watching from an undisclosed location. Claire was thriving, adopted by 37 institutions worldwide, piloted in schools across underrepresented regions. But his heart hadn't softened. His clarity hadn't blurred. Then came the email. Again. Same chancellor. Same tone. But this time it read, in light of recent events and decisions, the Board of Governors formally and publicly extends to Mr. Marcellus Grant full reinstatement, honorary degree elevation, and an open platform to develop his work within a newly founded independent ethics lab. We request his response by week's end. The letter was long. What it said in paragraphs Marcellus could feel in seconds. We're offering the keys. Please, take them before we collapse. Eliza texted him that night. It's not a seat at their table. It's them asking to sit at yours. Simone was more blunt. You say yes, and they get their redemption arc. You say no, and the story becomes yours alone. Marcellus closed his eyes, recalling the first day. The hallway whispers, the looks, the way the professor's words didn't echo. They branded, and he thought of Ezra, of that sealed archive, of a legacy that nearly vanished. He stood on a balcony, dusk sinking over the skyline, thinking not of victory, but of weight. What do you do when the system that tried to erase you now asks for your signature to survive? That night, a small roundtable aired on global television. It featured student leaders, educators, and Marcellus, finally making a virtual appearance. He said little, until the final question. Mr. Grant, the moderator asked, Cambridge has extended a public reinstatement with full honors. The world waits for your response. What do you intend to do? Marcellus leaned forward on the screen, voice quiet but unmistakably firm. I never needed to be let back in, he said. What I needed was for the doors to stop locking behind people like me.
The moderator pressed gently.
So, will you accept their offer? Marcellus smiles faintly, reaches into his bag, and pulls out an envelope stamped with his decision. But instead of answering, he holds it up and says, I'll read it live at the Clare Global launch. The day of the Clare Global launch felt like a coronation, not one bestowed by kings or old universities, but one born of resistance, persistence, and the kind of brilliance that can't be contained by ivy-covered walls. Geneva's Grand Assembly Hall, usually home to sterile panels and bureaucratic policy debates, had been transformed into something electric. Glass displays projected images of Clare's evolution, from its first line of code on a dim dorm room screen, to live demos running in over 50 countries. Banners hung from the ceilings in a dozen languages, each bearing the same phrase, we belong. And at the center of it all stood the stage. Marcellus walked onto it in a tailored navy blue suit, his presence calm but undeniable. The crowd, students, technologists, teachers, journalists, and parents from every corner of the globe rose to their feet before he even said a word. Behind him, the Claire symbol pulsed in rhythm, a soft glow humming like a heartbeat. He waited for the applause to settle. I was 17. He began when someone looked me in the eye and said, "You should drop the class." A hush swept over the room. I didn't drop it. I rebuilt it. He paused. They didn't just question my presence. They tried to erase it. But I realized something important. The institutions we fight to be part of were never built with us in mind. So maybe, just maybe, it's time we build new ones. The audience was still breath held. He reached into his blazer pocket, pulled out a crisp white envelope, and held it up. "This," he said, "is my official response to Cambridge's reinstatement and honorary degree offer." The cameras zoomed in. Every news channel's live stream ticked higher. Marcellus tore it open slowly, unfolding the paper. Then he read, "To the Chancellor and Board of Cambridge University, thank you for the offer. I decline. I do not seek restoration within a structure built on exclusion. I am building something else." The audience erupted. But Marcellus raised a hand, not to quiet them, but to hold their attention for what came next. "Today, I'm announcing the launch of a new institution. One that doesn't ask students to shrink to fit inside it. One that doesn't confuse tradition with truth. One that uses the tools of technology, not to gatekeep, but to liberate." He stepped aside, and the screen behind him changed. The Equity Institute. Global. Accessible. Centered on marginalized brilliance. The crowd gasped. The website URL lit up. A QR code appeared. Simone Price, seated in the front row, had known this was coming. But even she clutched her press badge like it was holy. Eliza Moore blinked back tears. On her lap, her daughter, just 7, whispered, "He's not like the others, is he?" "No," Eliza said. "He's the one who changed the game." Marcellus continued. "The Equity Institute isn't just a school. It's a system. Open source, interdisciplinary, and free for students who have been historically excluded. Funded by partners who believe in equity, without exception. Built on a curriculum that centers lived experience alongside academic excellence." Behind him, logos appeared. Grassroots organizations, major tech backers, even formerly silent institutions now pledging support. The application portal was already live. In the first hour, 14,000 students registered. By the end of the day, but numbers weren't the victory. The victory was what he saw in the faces in the crowd. Black students from London, indigenous youth from Brazil, Muslim girls in hijabs, first-generation scholars from Appalachia, kids who were told they didn't speak the right way, didn't test high enough, didn't belong in the room. And now, they were the room. Marcellus closed his speech with a final thought. "They tried to make me invisible, but you can't erase someone who builds their own light." The applause shook the rafters. Backstage, his team cried. His mother, flown in from Baltimore for the first time in years, wrapped him in a quiet, unshakable hug. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "But I always knew you would."
Outside, cameras flashed. Hashtags exploded. Universities worldwide requested Equity Institute partnerships.
But inside the venue, as the celebration roared, a single voice cut through. A little girl, maybe 8, clutched her mother's hand tightly. She pointed to the stage and asked in a voice just loud enough to catch Simone's attention, "If he did it, so can I." Her mother didn't hesitate. "Yes, baby. He just opened the door, and you're gonna walk through it." If you've ever been told you're not good enough, if you've ever watched someone brilliant get silenced, just because of who they are, then you know this story isn't just fiction, it's reality for too many. Type yes if you believe the system must change. Subscribe if this broke your heart.